let's make experiments better. Let's make our tests better so we actually know what we're looking for before we spend all this money and then realize we have to reduce that. I'm going to talk about a new take on prototyping that could save you millions. It's not necessarily new, and it's going to be kind of following up on some of Arlen's presentation yesterday as well. So just kind of to give you a little bit of background about me, I've sort of been all over the map for school. I did my undergrad and master's at the University of Wyoming and UC Berkeley in structural engineering. So I have kind of a weird roundabout path to how I ended up in biomedical device design. I actually worked as a structural engineer for about a year and a half. Decided I didn't like it, and so I ended up at the University of Colorado in the Advanced Medical Technologies lab, working on both device design, and then more specifically, I was working on using analysis and finite element analysis to actually inform how we design these devices. I graduated there about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I guess, and then started at Structural Integrity Associates, where they've been doing finite element analysis of really hard nonlinear problems for a long time. We have kind of 250 highly technical staff all over the country. We have some material testers, some material scientists, and they specialize sort of in advanced nonlinear mechanics and FEA in highly regulated industries. So they started in the nuclear power plant world, which is very, very regulated, and then have sort of since then expanded into different industries such as aerospace. We've done a little bit with automotive, but I'm kind of their first foray into the biomed world. They had all these tools, but they didn't have anyone that really liked working on tissue and devices and things like that. So that's where I came in. So just to sort of give you a background, I'm going to tell you a bunch of numbers that you guys probably have more understanding of and a better idea of than I do about how much it costs to bring a device to market. And then hopefully I'll sort of open your eyes on some benefits of using predictive computational modeling, and then give you a couple of examples of projects that I work on that I can sort of talk about. And then just sort of talk about where I think this is leading as well. So here's just sort of a general study that was done by Stanford in 2010, where they say it costs an average of $31 million to take a 510K product to market from initial concept, and an average of $94 million to take a PMA product to market. So if we can reduce these numbers, I'm sure people would be very happy. And so where I'm really going to sort of talk about how you can use computational modeling to help this is in the concept development and proof of concept areas, and then also how we can sort of use it to inform our clinical tests and things like that. Let's make experiments better. Let's make our tests better so we actually know what we're looking for before we spend all this money and then realize we have to reduce that. This just sort of talks about the time it takes to do this. So you see, on average, it takes a 510K product about 20 months just in that concept development and proof of concept phase. I know that that's pretty widely varying depending on the type of product you have and what you're doing, but just to give you sort of a general idea, we're going to hopefully help you reduce that time. And then lastly, it comes down to money. Estimated costs of delays for a 30-person company, so an 8-week delay. Sheldon et al. Estimates that cost the company about $1.8 million. 20 animal study, $5.5 million. I think that was for a year of work as well and a year delay, and same with the additional 100 patient study. So these are big numbers. So if you can avoid doing additional studies and reduce your amount of delays, I'm not exactly reinventing the world. That's sort of what everyone's been talking about throughout this whole conference, right? Is let's do things better to save money and make better products. So how can we use predictive computational modeling to help this? Well, you can reduce your time to market. You can speed up the design iteration process so you can do more iterations. You can build a better device. Again, I think there was a talk earlier today that was talking about we need to get back to focusing on people and focusing on what's our ultimate goal when we're designing these medical devices. We want to help the patient. We want to build better products, and sort of a byproduct of that is hopefully we'll also be making more money with these better products. You can foresee potential errors that you might not have thought as obvious before you actually are building these devices. Reduce experimental testing, and then also improve what you're looking for in these tests, improve how you conduct these tests, and the likelihood for FDA approval. My boss asked me to just sort of summarize this in one concise statement, and I want to help produce safer, more effective products faster. Like that's sort of the end goal. I know that's very general, but that's, again, I think if we don't look at sort of the end goal, we are going to get bogged down in the details and lose that. So predictive modeling, Arlen touched on this yesterday, of until recently, modeling of medical devices is sort of, I felt like it's fit into one of two categories. We've either looked at the device itself, but then how do you model it in vitro? Like it's acting on, with all the soft tissue, it's acting on it. How do you actually model those boundary conditions? That's really hard. And then what's it doing to the body? You're putting something foreign into the body. Or we've looked at the tissue itself. A lot of people have struggled at actually combining those two, looking at how medical devices interact with the tissue and how they actually work. So that's sort of what my PhD was focused on, and then also what I've been working to do now. So predictive modeling now, it not only models the device, but also the physics within the tissue when it's acted on by the device. So this could be simple, like deformation. If you have a needle and you're poking it through the skin, like what's going on in the skin, what stresses do you need to reach to push it through the skin, fluid flow through the biological tissue. My thesis was developing a thermoporal mechanics model of biological tissue. I won't bore you with, that's a lot of math. If you ever want to see it, I can send it to you. There's like 2,000 equations or something in my thesis. But looking at temperature in the tissue, chemical reaction, tissue remodeling, we can do all of these things now in or through within the biological tissue. And honestly, most of the time we have to do many of these things and sort of explain how they affect one another. Again, this is a very simplified slide, but I think it really kind of hammers home the point of this could be a device, this could be even just a little portion of your device. You have some need that you have to meet, right? You come up with ideas of how you're going to solve that need. You design a prototype. I mean, most of the time, I swear I spend half of my time in SolidWorks anymore. But you come up with a design, you come up with ideas for this design, then you produce, you say, okay, this is the best one, we want to produce this prototype. Or maybe you come up with a simple prototype of 3 different designs, then you test it, and you go through this loop over and over and over again until you kind of get down to the design that works the best and what you want. Well, I'm sort of proposing that we want to speed up that design. So you still have your need, you come up with a bunch of ideas, you prototype this digitally, I mean, in SolidWorks or in whatever you feel like you want to prototype it in, and then we simulate the design performance. Now, this could be as simple of doing stuff that we already have the tools to do, or maybe we have to do some laboratory benchtop testing to validate the computational models. But you take those designs, a lot of the times, even just doing simple computational models, you discover new needs, or you're like, oh, this might not actually do what we want it to do. So then you go back, come up with new ideas, come up with new designs, but you're not having to build any physical prototypes and take that time to build those prototypes. From that, you can also say, well, this one looks like it is the best design, but now instead of coming up with 10 designs and then narrowing it down to one, maybe you can come up with 100, or you can do an optimization study and sort of narrow down on what you think the best design, produce that, test that, and then lastly, you get additional experimental input, or you can sort of look at what you might really want to focus on with your testing, or it just sort of helps inform that testing as well. So now I'm going to take you through a couple of examples, because this is all great theory, but unless you actually see how it's applied, it doesn't really matter, right? So during my PhD, ComEd Electrosurgery they were really interested in developing a model to inform and speed up their design process. So this was taking a while, and it was of their tissue fusion devices, which they used to both cut and fuse cut and fuse arteries. And sort of the goal was to develop a predictive FEA model we knew we were going to use experimental data, but they didn't want to use a ton of experimental data. And most of the data that we used was stuff that they were sort of collecting anyways as they went along, and then use that to inform device design. So I came up with a model. This I ran on my desktop computer with 6 gigs of RAM. It was back 4 or 5 years ago. And this is kind of what it looks like. The top is, you're looking at the isochoric strain energy, which is a fancy way of comparing things to stress and strain. It was a more informative value, I guess, and then temperature at the bottom. And from this, and then from a little bit more experimental testing, we were able to actually take these terms and come up with a way of measuring the damage in the tissue. And then actually I wrote a little user subroutine that modeled how the tissue was mechanically being damaged. And we didn't care about if the cells were staying alive. We just cared if there was actual mechanical strength left in the tissue or if it was being cut all the way through. And we were able to predict pretty well. This is my favorite picture, not all of the pictures. I always have to put this caveat of not all of the pictures lined up exactly like this, but this test actually ended up doing that. And but we were able to sort of say, we're going to predict the outcome of this surgery. We were able to do it almost 90% of the time. And we were also able to put bounds on sort of, you have to press this hard with this device and you have to get it this hot, or you're not going to see cutting, or you might only see it 50% of the time. And we ran a whole parametric study on different artery sizes, on different temperatures and different pressures and all kinds of different things that really provided some insight. You see on the right side there's sort of this little ridge. They wanted to get rid of that ridge. And I ran several simulations and said, if you get rid of that ridge, you're not going to be able to cut the tissue. And one of the more experienced people there was like, oh yeah, 30 years ago, we tried to do this without that. And they were like, nope, and we knew you couldn't cut the tissue. So little insights like that into just the jaw design are pretty interesting. And then, so really these FEA models were used to iterate the jaw shape and the control parameters. We could run tens or hundreds of simulations or optimization simulations in the time it took them to build one physical prototype of these jaws. And then we were able to do parametric studies. And there were still some upfront V&V experimental tests, but they were doing these anyways. And a lot of the times you have to do these anyways. But now they have these tools and this understanding of the tissue to where they just sort of have to go back and validate their models, which that's a big thing in the nuclear world is we have lots of good ways of validating models because they don't let you go test nuclear. They don't really let you test anything with nuclear anymore, or it's very small scale. So just sort of the statistics behind that as well. And then another example, I can't talk too much about this one, but I think this is sort of, that first one was more of a big picture, how does this affect our whole device? This was just a very simple part of their design process, but it was causing pretty significant delays. They needed a composite tube casing, and they kind of needed special holes within the tube or special lumens in order to house their tooling. And this casing needed to be able to be pushed through an artery, but if it crimped at all, it just damaged their tools pretty significantly. And it was taking them 6 to 8 weeks to get these special custom tubes. And so they'd have to get the tube, they'd go test it in the lab, be like, oh, this doesn't, like, it's not as stiff as we need, or it's too flexible, it's not what we need, as they were trying to push it through some porcine arteries. And including the initial benchmarking of the material, which they had already done, like they've gone through several iterations of this, we were able to come up with numerous design ideas and run simulations of them, and the amount of time it took them to get one, or a lot of the times my colleague over there said that they would order 10 different types because it was taking 6 to 8 weeks for them to get these tubes into case. So this is just one very small part of a design that was causing pretty significant delays in them sort of moving forward with producing their product, where it was something we could really help them out with and say, yeah, let's run through several iterations on a computer and sort of come up with the best design, and then you can have that produced instead of having to wait 6 weeks just to get a product that wasn't working how you wanted it to do. So really just kind of summarizing everything. So what can we do with predictive computational modeling? Well, we can come up with faster design, or you can iterate more quickly. You can iterate more, so you can converge on a better solution, and you get additional insight into the performance. Then you get a better design product. You hopefully see better performance during testing, and you see less testing, or what you need of less testing. And then lastly, hopefully you get a better product, it gets to market faster, and it costs less. And that's kind of the ideal world. And this is just one way that we're sort of helping companies do that. And then lastly, just sort of looking at the future, Arlen touched on the ASME VMV 40 that's supposedly coming out with guidelines this year. And then one of my favorite, and he also touched on the high computing performancing. Like if you have a laptop, you can run these 100-core simulations now, and it's 1 million degrees, or 10 million, or 100 million degrees of freedom in a simulation is not a problem anymore. And then lastly, my favorite quote was from a paper that just came out from the FDA, where they say that they believe computational modeling is poised to become a critical tool for accelerating regulatory decision making. And adopting this will be essential for advancing their mission. So that's kind of speaking to where this field is going and how important being able to use these tools effectively is. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions.
I'll start, Dr. Fankell.
Mm-hmm.
Respect, man. That was good. Most of what you said went over my head, but that's when I know it's really good. And I never really thought about the parallels between the structural work that you used to do and the structural work that goes into making a medical device. It's just, I don't think everyone in TV land, certainly I, would have made that intuition. You referred to Dr. Ward's work yesterday, and both of you are on different planes as it relates to simulating. You talked a lot about as it relates to clinical trials and animal testing, and you talked about it from another angle. Where do you see your work overlapping, and where is it quite different?
I would say mostly it's different in our expertise. So we kind of both got our PhD looking at these vessel sealing devices. And it was kind of funny. I've been meeting with him. We're both in Denver as well, but we hadn't met until about 6 months ago.
Oh, you knew one another.
Yep, okay. We do.
Go over one another's houses at all? Or
we have coffee every now and then.
All right.
But he's much more in the energy tissue interaction world, so hitting it with lasers, hitting it with ultrasound, things like that. I'm much more in the looking at the structural mechanics side of things. And honestly, I mean, they do overlap some of, very rarely are we looking at one physics anymore. Like my PhD thesis was looking at the fluid flow and the water becoming vapor and how it was expanding the tissue and what was going on as far as the deformations of those tissues. So that, like, there is some overlap, but I would say I'm much more of a structural mechanics side of thing, looking at structural damage, not necessarily thermal damage.
This was actually, I think the last time that we met for coffee, this was one of the things that we talked about quite a bit, because it's easy to say, oh, we both work in simulation and so we're natural competitors, right? People that would work with me, would work with him, and so one of us would be losing out between that. But really in the conversation, what we realized is if there's a lot of different areas of expertise that people outside of the simulation world may not really have an appreciation for. And looking at it more as we have a network of people that each are focused in different areas. It helps when a device company comes to me and says, we have a problem. A good example of that is insertion forces for needles, right? My response to that is, I know someone you should be talking to. Could we do it? Yeah, probably, but I know somebody that can do it a lot better than we could, and point them in that direction. And being that connector, like you and I have talked about before, I think is going to be necessary in the simulation world as it relates to medical devices, because we can't expect medical device companies to have that knowledge of the entire area.
What I'll say, and I'll come right to you, Tor and Hillary, because I don't understand the discipline like you doctors can. I think about design and development firms as, I'm going to delegate that. They're going to design and develop it for me. And this term about structural integrity and all of these things, that never even occurred to me. I don't know, should I think about, and Tor, you're a great person to hand the mic to, should I think about most design and development companies have this expertise, or do they typically need to find someone like Doug or Arlen?
Sure. We talked about this a little earlier, but so we, as product development firms, we have simulators or some of the lower end ones. We get in trouble when we start working with non-Newtonian fluids and other things, right? but the challenge I see is that even though we have these capabilities and we rush to kind of make prototypes, you mentioned the needles puncturing through tissue. That was one of issues that we had, and the challenge for us was really to convince the client of the importance of getting the simulation versus going into actual porcine testing and so we ran into trouble when we actually tested on animals, because after one or two needle punctures, the needle dulled slightly and the whole instrument blew up in our hand, right? So we had to go back to the drawing board and the needle became the issue. But if we had earlier involvement with companies like yourselves, we probably could have avoided that. But again, the challenge is, how do we sell your services to our clients?
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, because I know time is a premium. You want to get to market, and I guess in most cases time is more valuable than money. But I wonder, just, if I were in this business and I had to make these decisions, I have a certain cost associated with you, but I might be able to avoid it if the testing goes fine and I didn't have the dulled needle, so I saved. But when it didn't work out that way, how much money did it cost to do it again? Not to mention the time. And would that be exactly how much he charges or a fraction of it? Do you have a perspective on that, or you, Tor?
I would say that's kind of exactly the argument that I'm making is, like, you can avoid all these delays. I think I'm trying to remember who was talking about yesterday, where they were talking about the cost of finding out these errors later on in the process. I mean, it's 500-fold or 1,000-fold or 100-fold. Like, it's much, much more expensive. And then also just coming up with these computer models, while it's expensive, animal testing can get really expensive really fast if you're not careful. And so I would say you can both look at it from a time aspect of, I can set up 15 simulations and run them overnight. And I can press go on Friday and have an answer Monday morning.
Do you think it'd be a fair parallel to say that hiring someone like your firm for simulations is like an insurance policy? Like I'm paying a certain premium to mitigate risk.
I would say that's definitely one part of, I would say, yes, that's one way of looking at it. Maybe not necessarily the whole way of looking at it. We also can sort of help drive innovation by being able to kind of test your crazier design ideas and things like that. Not necessarily.
I think we actually ended up using more finite element analysis to our advantage when we start looking at the different needle tips, whether or not it was a single probe or a tri-lobe, and as we worked through it, we let the simulation do the work, and then we were able to optimize prototype, then go back and take that prototype and optimize it again. But it wasn't a clear yes or no answer, where I think in our world as prototype or product developments, if you CNC something out of ABS, you're 98% sure it's going to work, where in a finite element analysis, it's a little bit more fuzzy, I think, to people that are untrained in it.
Yeah, and
I want to follow up with Tor and ask what you'll have a better sense of your competitive set. How often is it that, just as I said immaturely a few moments ago, design and development firm, they're going to design and develop. How many design and development firms typically have functional expertise like Doug's in-house? Would you say quarter, half, a third?
So I think everybody will say they have it, but I think whether or not you're using SolidWorks Simulator versus ANSYS or whatever you're using, there's a different level of functionality and capability, and then it's also who's developing the parameters of the test to make sure that the test is actually working. So yeah, we can say we have it, but are we doing it efficiently and correctly? And it's.
Yeah, I have a whole soapbox about SolidWorks simulation because it's making things easy, but as Arlen was saying yesterday, unless you're doing a good job validating and verifying, it's A, that it's doing what it should be doing, and B, that it's actually simulating the physics that's going on in the world.
Just, the reason I'm going a little beyond time on this is because I think this issue is probably something that the folks in TV land face a lot, because I know, as I said, I would be clueless about that. If my design development firm says they can do that, they can do that. So how would what kind of questions would I ask to even know that, well, could you, because I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of your clients are companies like Tor's that do design and development instead of the manufacturer themselves, because they don't even know that they should really be asking you.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's definitely been the people who have been most interested in working with us, I would say, for sure.
Because, is that the same for you, Arlen? Yeah.
And it's definitely, I would say, asking a simple question like, how are you validating this model? Like, how are you proving to me that the model is doing what what you say it's doing? Because that's a huge, that was what I spent a big portion of my thesis on, was actually like, I developed this crazy mathematical framework. Now, actually, is it doing what I hope it's doing?
At the end of the day, I'm going to talk a bit about medicaldevicesgroup.net, this site that I lead, and I want it to be extremely useful. Just talking with you, I'm thinking it would be great. I think everyone in this room can contribute to it. What is the compendium of questions that you didn't even know to ask? It's like you didn't even know it was going to be on the test. Because I'll meet, physician entrepreneurs who have a great idea, and they're like, and they won't know to ask these questions in the first place. If we could put together a resource it'll be exhausting and it'll be intimidating, but if you show it to the right people, did you ask these questions? If you have electricity running through it, did you ask these questions? Does it have IoT? Could it? How will it interact? All these things. So, a group effort, it's really the spirit of the community that I've attempted to build. And Hillary, you have a question.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if you have anyone that comes to you not kind of on the large manufacturing side, but with an idea of, we have this problem and we don't know where to start. Do you have anyone who comes to you and says what material or what thickness? I'm thinking of a particular application with someone who's working on a urethral stent that continues to clog. I'm just thinking this could be really helpful for something like that.
Oh, definitely. We definitely have had some of that. Or you get people that are, again, like you said, kind of almost sort of clueless of, I have this idea, but I have no idea what to do. I mean, I used to deal with it. I'm an adjunct advisor of a grad design team, and they came up to me and they're like, oh, we have this great idea and this great design. And I looked at it and I was like, well, you have to make that 3 times thicker, otherwise it's just going to break every single time you even, just little things like that.
But like, what do you mean?
What?
I said, were they like, what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. They were like, and I asked them, I was like, you're engineers, have you done any mechanical analysis on this? And they were like, oh no, yeah. I was like, don't be scared of equations, it's okay.
Well, you have 2,000 in your paper, so where can we read 2,000 equations in case we,
I can.
Yeah, I'm joking. I have no interest whatsoever in reading that document. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Fankell, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.